Right, hey guys, how are we doing? Back with another video from Totally Not Mark, and today we are checking out his first review of Mob Psycho 100, covering season 1. This is Boss. I literally just finished season 3 like last week. I think this anime is awesome, and in my personal opinion, I feel like it's better than One Punch Man. Even though, from what I've seen, I haven't caught up with the One Punch Man manga. I'm anime only with both of these. So yeah, I really enjoyed Mob Psycho. Season 1 was incredible. In fact, it was all just Boss. But let's see what Mark has to say on season 1, shall we?
I am a big fan of One Punch Man, but
Okay.
oddly enough, despite its massive surge in
Wow.
popularity, I haven't seen the other super hit from the prolific author of One Punch Man, entitled Mob Psycho 100.
Oh,
This is
mate,
a show with
so
a main
good.
character that has the same face as One Punch Man, Saitama, is animated with a degree of polish the likes of which don't even reside within my dreams.
The animation on the fights is just so slick. Like, everything looks kind of like dulled down and basic at times, and then as soon as like the colors start flying and the power is everywhere and everyone's smashing through walls and everything, oh my god, it just looks so freaking good.
And is about psychics and ghosts, I
Yeah.
think. I'm honestly not too sure about that last one, and that concludes my summary of the knowledge I have in my brain concerning this
Going
series.
into it, right,
I'm
fair.
serious. I know nothing else about this story, so this one should be interesting to explore with fresh eyes. And given that the series is officially finished, there's no better time than right now to review the anime, the manga, the music, and the behind-the-scenes production of
Oh,
this
cool. That'd be
massive,
cool to see.
successful series. Will I enjoy this series more than I enjoyed One Punch Man?
I think we're about to find out. That's cool. Like, he's doing behind the scenes stuff as well. I like that.
Will it live up to the whirlwind of hype surrounding it? When this video is done, what will I think of Mob Psycho 100?
You're gonna love it. Oh, a cover, cool. Oh,
Alrighty, so
gotta say that. Actually, no, I'll leave it. I'll leave it.
this isn't a long series by any means. The manga is only 16 volumes
Oh, is that
long,
all it
and
is? Sweet,
the
okay.
single most interesting manga I've ever wanted to take a look at. As I'm sure many of you are aware, one, unlike many other popular mangakas of the modern manga scene, doesn't exactly have a conventional
Well.
artistic style one might expect from someone that's accrued such enormous success across the world.
Yeah, a
I
bit
think
different,
that's
innit?
honestly fascinating and speaks to the characters he's created and endearing drawings he's grown a substantial following with. And so, to be clear, I'm not discounting the original manga. In fact, while I will be placing a hefty amount of emphasis and attention to the gloriously produced anime, I've always been curious to see the source material from which the studios draw inspiration and guidance from.
Yeah, it's always cool to see the original stuff, isn't it? Like, and then you can be like, wow, they actually did that based off of this. Because I've seen some bits of the manga, and the way they've just like oomphed it onto the screen it's unreal.
Unlike One Punch Man, which received the red carpet treatment by being redrawn by Yusuke Murata,
Yo.
possibly the best artist in the business
Whoa.
right now, Mob's manga is one's original artwork for all of us to enjoy, raw, unfiltered, and entirely
Oh, wow.
true to his vision of the story. And so, because of that, I'll be curious to explore how
And
or
to go
if
from
his original
that to
version
that.
has been adapted,
Whoa.
compromised, or enhanced by the vehicle of this incredibly impressive looking anime. In this video, I plan on analyzing the source manga from one. I want to dissect the music of this series as well as break down its incredibly healthy production and development behind the scenes. And that's not even to mention this crazy story. And episode 1 seems like a great place to start.
Beep. I love it.
Okay, so I've sat down and I've watched all of Mob Psycho 100's first season, and this show is amazing.
It's incredible,
This,
isn't it?
unironically,
Oh,
might be
yeah.
my new favorite anime ever. Yeah, I'm gonna spend the next, I don't know, half an hour, 40 minutes, how much is on the clock, talking to you about how it's made, why it's so damn good, and why I've never seen a show like this. Okay, here I go.
It really
The
stands out.
introduction.
It really stands out.
Unlike Attack on Titan, One Piece, or Naruto, unlike JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, or even Hunter x Hunter, Mob Psycho 100 opens its narrative with no clear story or path forward. Instead, the first 3 episodes or so deal with singular events, self-contained stories of sorts that act as a mechanism to primarily introduce us to the key characters of this story.
And what I find interesting is a lot of shows that don't start off with the direct goal, like where the main character is trying to get to, like Naruto wanting to be Hokage, example. They seems to ditter off. Like that was one of Bleach's problem with the narrative, wasn't it? Like there's no real end goal. It's like what's happening, and it becomes difficult. Whereas so a show like Mob shows that you can actually pull off an absolutely incredible show without giving that person like a specific goal from the get-go that we're rooting for them to get to.
In other words, it doesn't give us an obvious narrative reason to keep watching, like Dragon Ball did with I gotta collect all the Dragon Balls, or like
Right.
Attack on Titan did with we gotta get across the walls and freedom and all that kind of crack, right? And yeah, Mob Psycho 100 doesn't really do any of that, at least not in any obvious way. And to be honest, normally when it comes to stories that start off without establishing a clear-cut goal, they tend to lose me quickly. However, there was something about this series that felt different. Normally, I'm waiting for a narrative through line to hold onto when I start watching or reading something. But when it comes to one's best work, the author of both One Punch Man and Mob Psycho, he actively tries to fight against that, and I think it helps to reinforce what his work stands for. Mob Psycho 100, much like One Punch Man, despite having wildly different main characters, represents a fantastical world with plenty of over-the-top, even silly gag humor. The goal here is to make us laugh, and it more than definitely succeeds in that effort. However, as is the case with one's work and his most popular characters in Saitama and Mob himself, while we might see these stories they occupy as being silly or over-the-top, these appearances are designed by one to be deceiving. In other words, there's always more to these characters and these stories than what initially meets the eye. How a character is revealed to us oftentimes tells us a lot about their personality. In the case of Saitama in One Punch Man, he's very quickly depicted as the world's de facto superhero before, moments later, blowing away the monster in an instant. It is only later we find out that he's largely an unknown doing it because he wants to. Such is the subversive nature of One Punch Man. Mob Psycho, while similarly subversive, takes an entirely different but similarly appropriate approach. Unlike Saitama, who was depicted as this impressive, impactful, and domineering superhero that's there to save the day, Mob Psycho opens by introducing Reagan, a smooth-talking, largely good-natured con artist pretending to be sidekick for hire. He is Mob's boss, and while he is a supporting character, Mob isn't even the second or third character introduced in his own story. And
like, I want to talk so much about season 3, but I'll save it in case people are doing like the whole watching the season then seeing what Mark thinks, because
how the anime decides to introduce him is, honestly, I think, ingenious. As I will soon explore, a driving theme within Mob Psycho 100's narrative is that of manipulation and deceit. How others can use people to get ahead in this world, and the philosophy that comes with those that choose to not leverage their position to put down others. In the first episode, Reagan accepts a job to exorcise a ghost. Fails to do so because course he does, and then resorts to calling on Mob, someone who actually is talented and has the skills necessary to deal with this exorcism. He is the fifth character introduced in his own story.
Crazy.
And when he is introduced, it's because Reagan needs him. Unlike Reagan, who exploded onto our screens with plenty of charisma and energy, or the dramatic and silly scene the couple he's dealing with had, or even the grand entrance the ghost made. Instead of all of that, Mob is introduced from afar, as a car that already looks like it's part of the background pulls out of the way, revealing some unassuming, shy wallflower, the likes of which look more unremarkable than any other character in this series. This is a perfect introduction to Mob as a character. And everything
you just don't
from
expect
his
him
design,
to be capable.
introduction, even voice actor was measured to reflect that specific sense of normality surrounding him. Where Saitama eventually flashes onto her screen after a dramatic build-up, Mob, on the other hand,
just
looks
doesn't.
aggressively unimpressive. That is until...
God, those colours, man.
And as we divert our attention away from the action-packed set pieces of the first couple of episodes, this choice pays dividends, and we begin to understand more why this direction for the character was chosen. We see him in school and in his day-to-day life. We see his relationship with his parents and brother, how he's failing both academically and physically, and how he has no friends inside or outside of school to speak of. Reflected in the first episode's closing but sweet and somber scene that reinforces the relationship he has with Reagan as Mob looks on at others chatting and exchanging life experiences before happily returning back to Reagan's side, the closest person Mob has to a real friend inviting him to share dinner. Outside of that, the series, due to its muted and somewhat passive main character, creates a rather large vacuum of charisma to be filled, and so I present to you the king of Riz, Reagan. The brief description I offered of Reagan paints him like an awful person, and while he sort of is in his own way,
kinda
due to
is.
the way the character is written, it depicts a more roguish character than a complete reprehensible one.
very
So
flawed.
much so that he pretty much steals the show if you don't pay close enough attention. In these opening episodes, and indeed through to the end, the fashion with which he's able to disarm what would otherwise be a dangerous or jailable offense with his gift of conversation is a fascinating superpower I've not seen presented in a more entertaining way on the page or silver screen in years. Reagan is a once-in-a-generation type of character,
He really
and
is.
he must be protected at all costs. At this point, there's a lot of conscious artistic choices being made, like the voice actor and the animation, so I want to touch on that for just a second because they really helped to elevate this particular direction the story decided to go in. Bringing this show to life from such a unique source material is a challenging task, no matter the experience or age of the director involved in bringing it to life.
Yeah, like, how do you even start? Like, yeah.
And when I found out that the series was adapted by director Yuzuru Tachikawa
What's he
in
done?
his late 30s, I was blown away.
Okay.
However, he did have an impressive resume to his name.
Yeah, what's he do?
Outside of working for prolific studios like Madhouse and Studio Pierrot, he's directed the beloved Death Billiards and Death Parade anime, featured on Kill la Kill and Attack on Titan, and
Nice.
also co-directed Terror in Resonance with the legendary Shinichiro Watanabe, of none other than Cowboy Bebop fame. And through doing so, built up a huge reputation for himself, and by extension, an extensive list of talented friends from which he was able to draw from to work on Mob Psycho 100. I mentioned earlier that Mob appearing a certain way in this anime was a necessary part of the story, and so I think this quote from Author 1 on the subject of adapting his manga was rather illuminating. He said, "The only thing I asked the staff to do was to keep the anime's Mob looking as close to the original as possible. But other than that, I'd rather an adaptation have some character to it than be a slave to the source."
Sweet,
and
cool.
through interviews, we can see as clear as day that Tachikawa, the series director, took the original work extremely seriously. And this rather serious and dedicated approach to the source material is clear from the get-go. Mob Psycho 100's animation style, approach, and philosophy largely runs counter to the standard practice of the modern animation industry in Japan. It shuns CGs, instead falling back on hand-drawn vehicles and interiors, all in the name of giving this series an old-school flavor, and to that effect, the legendary Yoshimichi Kameda came in as character designer, renowned for his inky and snappy animation across an endless number of shows like Full Metal Alchemist, Space Dandy,
Six-Star
and of
Milos.
course,
Oh, Space
One
Dandy.
Punch Man.
Wow.
And in this first episode, it's clear as day that he leads this outing. His work is the core foundation of Mob's visuals. Sketchy lines, dynamic and exaggerated facial expressions, snappy gesticulations. It's all Kameda to its core.
Whoa.
He is quite a strict supervisor, but with talent like this, it works and keeps things alive consistently. Which is wonderful because the first episode bounces around from scene to scene, encounter after encounter, and without a consistently fun and expressive design and animation philosophy such as this,
So
conversations
loud.
such as those
Just love
which
it.
Reagan
Look at that.
engages in might not hit the highs the anime otherwise succeeded in reaching.
Exaggeration.
This choice of initially and predominantly depicting Mob as an aggressively mediocre and mundane schoolboy was a measured but conscious effort. And as it happens, Setsuo, the actor who voices Mob in the anime, is a complete newbie. And when asked about this choice, Tachikawa had this to say: "I wanted Mob to have a voice nobody would recognize. I wanted the voice actor, just like Mob himself, to be someone relatively unremarkable. We had a huge number of candidates for the role, but in the end, Ito's voice most fit my idea of Mob."
Wow. Attention to detail, man. I want someone that's never done voice work before to voice Mob. That's brilliant.
And so, I hope this brief analysis of the series' opening helps to shed some light on why I don't mind that the series didn't open with a clear narrative goal in mind, because it does seem to have a vague narrative goal. Mob has expressed to some degree a desire. That is, outside of the one vertical he's particularly exceptional at, he's weak in others and he wants more. He wants connection. He wants what the everyday person has. And him being this exceptional person doesn't seem to matter if you have nothing else.
Yeah, you got no one else around. What's the point?
And invested now in seeing if he has the will to make this a reality for himself. And most importantly, how these obstacles and emotional stressors contribute to one of the most interesting mechanics used
The
in this
percentage.
game. The inclusion of a percentage meter counting up to 100, which represents an explosion of sorts. This naturally creates anticipation. And
Yep.
over the first 3 episodes, as we build towards that eventual explosion, we're anticipating. We gain a familiarity with the aspects of his life that actually trigger this metaphorical meter to rise closer and closer to a boiling point. In episode 2, Mob's introduced to a concept of seizing the day, because someday there might not be any time left to seize. And through that episode, he's being pulled in 2 separate directions by 2 different parties that both want or need something from him explicitly. The telepathy club threatened with abolishment from the class president due to lack of interest, and then there's of course Reagan, who without Mob would lose the only tangible asset that grants his business legitimacy.
Yeah, he
At the
can't
end of the
do
day,
anything.
this is the story of a young man being pushed and pulled emotionally in 2 opposing directions, neither of which have his best interests at heart, and makes the conclusion of this tale all the more satisfying when he chooses, quite bravely, to step outside of his comfort zone, choosing neither easy option offered to him, and instead chooses the path of self-improvement with, low-key, my favorite group
They
in this
are
entire
awesome.
show, the Good
Mate.
Gym Bros.
They are so upbeat and fun. Like, I love them. They're so good. They're so motivating.
They are amazing. The 3rd episode, however, is where we get a taste of what exactly we've been building to. And Mob in action is outstanding.
Yes.
And this crazy musical instrumentation that plays when he uses his powers is incredible. Wait, I haven't even talked about the music. Okay, music.
Let's go.
I don't think I need to say anything about this OP. It's easily one of the most gorgeously stylized
slick.
OPs I've ever come across. Brought to reality by Kameda, he apparently took inspiration for this opening's animation from the music video by Miyavi entitled Afraid to Be Cool. A momentary
Right.
glance is all you need to see the
Oh.
Neon City element from the
Yeah.
OP was heavily inspired
Wow.
by. But in terms of music, the theme song not only fits the series perfectly, counting to 100 with a building, swirling rhythm before devolving into a crescendo of
It's absolute madness, everything that goes on in this opening, man. There's so much. And I think Mother's Basement did a what's in an OP analysing it. There's loads of like hints at the story going on in it.
instrumentation at the end, but it is also the only song I've ever heard for the very first time that I immediately loved and, in tandem, was able to sing along to.
Started
because
counting
of course,
down.
I count to 100.
Yeah.
Humble brag. In terms of the broader series, though, one of the most fantastic musical additions to the story comes by way of how they utilize certain musical themes. A musical theme, in this context, is the primary piece of melodic information within a piece of music, which can, but doesn't have to, represent a narrative concept. Take the Imperial March by John
Okay.
Williams in Star Wars that represents the evil of the Republic, or Hedwig's theme from Harry Potter that represents places of safety and courage. However, this psychic theme of Mob's is out of this world, and I have to talk about it. If there's one single thing that the OST for this show achieves, the one element that I would argue is the most important, it's its carving out of a unique sound identity for itself from day one. People often don't give music the narrative credit it deserves, and there really is a story that can be told through music that I want to get into right
Oh,
now.
yeah,
because this
definitely.
soundtrack is incredible. Between the unique instrument used for Mob's theme, the off-kilter traditional drums and strings that are peppered throughout Mob and Reagan's lives, and the common but fascinating use of microtonal and out-of-tune instruments everywhere, gives me a ton to explore when it comes to analyzing music. But Mob Psycho 100's composer Kenji Kawai establishes an unmistakably immersive and unique soundscape for the series that both cements its distance from the contemporaries as well as wonderfully serves the characters and atmosphere of the show. And yes, you heard me right. He uses off-key microtonal music.
Wow.
And boy, is it everywhere in this score. So why does he choose to use out-of-key instrumentation at times? Well, as a quick and nerdy background for those uninitiated, in traditional Western musical theory, there are 12 notes in a scale. This
Right.
is what 98% of the notes you hear in any given month are made out of. Microtonal notes, on the other hand, are notes in between the 12 notes in our Western scale.
Interesting. We're learning
in
things
this
here,
track,
guys.
found in episode 3, many of the notes are microtonal. That is to say, slightly flat or sharp of notes that we would be used to
in
hearing.
between the normal
And
ones
this
we've
use of
noticed. Right,
off-key
okay.
and microtonal notes in the show's score really does an extreme amount of lifting in giving the music not only a unique, unmistakable flavor compared to other anime, but also, I think, serves to communicate the awkward, stilted vibe of Mob as a character in this story.
Yeah, I
narratively.
give
This
that.
theme is practically the musical representation of Mob's character.
Yeah, it's awkward. It adds to the awkwardness of him on screen. Yeah, I agree with that.
In the musical score, it's off-tuned in the same way that Mob is sort of out of place in his real world.
With everyone
He
else,
doesn't
yeah.
fit in anywhere, just like these notes. And that's such a wonderfully inspired musical idea. In episode 3, The story largely deals with Mob being misled into a cultist gathering which facilitates our introduction to the troublesome and power-hungry spirit
Dimple.
known henceforth as Dimple. The explosion, however, that takes place towards the conclusion of episode 3 is an almost terrifying and otherworldly scene to witness take shape before us. There are a set of themes in this soundtrack that are related to the stress that Mob often feels preceding his explosions, and the one used in this episode is downright terrifying. Entitled Toraum, if you didn't know anything about this show, you'd assume that this sense of terror is meant to be pointed towards the scary ghost brainwashing the masses in Dimple. But as onlookers, we of course understand that it is in fact
building up
likely
to
pointed towards what sort of terrifying thing may happen once Mob reaches 100% and snaps. These opening episodes offer us our first glimpse into how scary Mob Psycho 100
I missed that.
From the emotional state of Mob clear for us all to see, to the music used, to the animation, to the storyboard. And that's not even to mention some of the more obscure artistic expressions otherwise seen in this anime that give the series its otherworldly feel. Paint on glass animation is used all over this series.
Different styles
and comes
used,
straight from Miyu Sato and adds such an unusual, almost ethereal,
paint on glass,
possessive,
that's what it
sinister
is, right?
atmosphere to the animation for certain more intense scenes and the series ending animation, and it is utterly perfect for a series like Mob Psycho 100. Episode 3's animation is led by Goze Oda, an ex-Studio Ghibli in-between artist who gained substantial connections at Studio Bones after leaving. He's very much well known for his animation that isn't hugely concerned with detail, but instead with stretchy motion and unique smears as seen all over Mob's 3rd episode. It's not something hugely uncommon by today's standards, but it's a style he helped cultivate and popularize.
That's
Speaking
cool.
of convention,
That's really
typically when an episode of an animated series is produced, the animators actively try to stick as close to the model sheets produced by the character designers to retain a consistent look across the series. However, episode 3 is intentionally off-model. Sticking true to one's desire to allow the animation staff freedom, this episode where Mob contends with the cultists demonstrates that unbridled creativity. Sometimes doing this can alienate viewers, but clearly the staff saw the beauty in its uniqueness as Kameda stepped away from doing any art corrections for this one and let the episode sing untouched. Other episodes can offer their unique flares of brilliance, but nothing quite stands out quite like the creative choices made for episode 3. This is all to say that these 3 episodes all serve to create a wonderfully emotional and intense introduction to this series. I've never in my life seen a story brought to the silver screen with such a profoundly strong, intense sense of direction and identity. One Punch Man's first season truly does stand out as a monument to how incredibly flashy the talent residing within Japan can be, but Mob Psycho 100's introduction here demonstrates what a unified approach can offer a production with such enormous talent behind it, the likes of which would only be surpassed as time goes on in episodes 4 and beyond. Episode 3's cultish setting amongst those that were brainwashed by Dimple to smile time and again offered the perfect stage for Mob to naturally demonstrate what he can do, and more importantly, offered us a taste of what he's capable of. And little did we know that right around the next corner, something even more devastating was awaiting us.
Oh, here we go.
Teru versus Mob.
This is so cool.
I think episode 4 and 5 contends with some of the core themes of this story and in many ways deliver some of the best action we've seen in this series, depending on your tastes.
The way that they annihilate buildings and the blocks and everything, and everything else just moves so quick. Oh, it's so good.
And let me tell you, when I was sitting down to digest this series on day 1, after having already been blown away by what the first 3 introductory episodes have offered, episode 5 shattered any and all high expectations I had already had for this series. When watching this, episode 5 quickly became my absolute favorite episode. However, to think of this as a single episode success would be ignorant, as it not only stands on the shoulders of all the exposition elegantly delivered to us from the first 3 episodes, but also stands as one half of a 2-episode arc, with the 4th episode offering up some of the more introspective elements to what ultimately becomes one of the best animated episodes of television I've ever seen in my life. The human trait or narrative mechanism, take your pick, that more often than not drives the plot forward in this story is this constant need from others to push in the direction of seeking more power, more control, despite all the status, power, or abilities they may or may not have, and to achieve this, they again seek to manipulate directly or indirectly the odds into their favor. The class bully, otherwise called Onigawara, is such an individual as we learn of the criminal or thuggish world he's vying for greater respect within. Similarly, there's a new character introduced called Teruki Hanazawa.
There's a lot going on. There's a lot lot
and
going on.
he's very much someone to look out for in Mob's case, as he seems to not only have everything that Mob seems to want, but also happens to be gifted with psychic abilities just like Mob.
Yeah.
But something I'd like to chat about before we get into the real substance of this mini-arc is the small story that facilitates the first moment my excitement launched me from my chair and into a fit of laughing and anticipation. As we know, Mob struggles with athletics and physical fitness in addition to pretty much every other aspect of his life that isn't linked to his psychic abilities. In episode 2, he volunteered to join the Body Improvement Club, and despite it being filled with a group of conventionally looking bodybuilder types, they are, without question,
so nice.
the sweetest and most supportive force in Mob's life.
They are so like, let's go, Bob, we can do it.
Presently, they do not use him, they just support him as if he was part of the family despite his clear struggles. In other words, they admire his determination to plant each step in front of the other simply because he's trying to better himself and nothing more. That's so awesome and honestly stands out in this series of manipulators. However, in this very episode, through the manipulation of many key characters, Mob is led to an ambush that leads the gym bros showing up to save the day.
We've gotta help
the way
Mob.
they are depicted in this moment they arrive, it's like the 5 horsemen of the ass-whooping apocalypse arrives to serve them their collective task.
Yes.
They're there to save Mob. It's so funny and overly dramatic with appropriate animation and music to
Hell
emphasize
yeah,
this.
let's go.
It's easily the funniest and most oddly wholesome moment in the series for me.
そもそも超能力なんて生きていく上で必要ないんだ。
This is the conversation that reveals Mob's internal philosophy regarding his powers and his willingness to use them. It's a beautiful and resonant sentiment that colors not just this mini-arc, but indeed the rest of the series and beyond. When it was revealed that Ritu, his younger brother, wasn't altruistically considerate of Mob and secretly harbored a significant amount of resentment towards him, it by default introduced a phenomenal extra layer of nuance and complexity to the seemingly simple and lighthearted story. In this brief but illuminating conversation, Ritu asks if there are things he, Mob, can't have if he chooses to use his psychic abilities. And Mob responds, yes, muscles, the ability to understand girls, to read his surroundings and get more wisdom. It's been explained and demonstrated that Ritu has everything that Mob himself wants. He's popular and academically successful. And echoing this reality, Mob continues to say in return that he himself is envious of his brother for being able to do all of that. And in my view, this small statement highlights the key difference in thinking between Mob and the person who challenges him to an epic showdown later in this arc.
ゴリラが迷い込んだのか?
Teru vs. Mob is what many might consider to be the action highlight of this season, though I would personally argue it's but one of many. It's an amazing
there's so
season.
many
That
moments,
said,
man.
it is a
That guy that can wrap the energy
spectacle
around
to
his
bear
arm.
witness to, if ever there was one, and is driven entirely by character motivations, making it all the more emotionally compelling. A well-defined character is one that's capable of making decisions that are consistent with what we understand are their goals and beliefs of that established character. This is why we find characters like Captain America compelling, why Tony Stark is a thrill to watch, and even why Vegeta all the way through Dragon Ball Z was captivating to follow, because we knew what his thought process would be, and when he makes decisions, it's captivating. When characters make decisions that run counter to their beliefs, that's when our immersion is shattered and we start to scrutinize the script. And thankfully, the opposite is true for the great character writing moments, which is why, in my opinion, divorced from all the action, thrilling music and animation, this fight is fundamentally, on a written word, brilliant.
It is
Not
brilliant.
just because I enjoyed the characters, but because Mob and Teru, in this instance, represent opposing answers to a certain philosophical question that this show is asking. And that question is, should you use your powers for your benefit, whether they be supernatural or not? And Mob says no. Teru says yes.
Yeah. It's always good to have a fight that is narrative driven, and it just supports the fight even more. It's not just like one person versus another. It's two ideologies clashing at the same time. They're always the best type of fights. You're invested in both the physical aspect and the actual outcome as well, with the decision being made.
And this fight, more than just a clashing of powers and fists, is a battle of ideals. And whoever wins will likely change the other fundamentally.
I should start
forever.
reviewing anime and
Interestingly,
manga.
the very
I might do
existence of Teru
at
as a
some point
character
this year.
highlights that Mob, if he so chose to compromise his ideals, could have everything he so clearly wants and yearns for. Teru uses his powers to manipulate people, to scare larger and more intimidating people to do his bidding, and can even leverage his abilities to heighten his physical prowess. All areas we thought Mob just lacked in are now areas we can see he chooses not
to do,
utilize,
yeah.
because, as pointed out in the last episode, those that choose to use their positions or powers for selfish desires in an unfair manner are often blind to the shortcomings those shortcuts often open them up to. And
To quote Uncle Ben from Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility.
And as we see with Teru, oftentimes can lure them into believing that they are a god above all scrutiny and competition. And hilariously, but also fittingly, Reagan is the one who helped to instill that particular outlook on life for Mob. And when I learned that, I didn't know quite what to think. And in truth, it made me like and enjoy Reagan even more than I was already doing, if that was even possible.
There's a nice side to
It's
him.
absolutely possible.
Oh, yeah.
And it happens at the end, and I'm definitely going to talk about it. But back on topic. This fight is amazing. Mob might be an oblivious character, but the author, one, sure does know how to write dimwits with strong moral characters. This is such a wonderful scene, and the dismantling of Teru's life philosophy is scathing. We are the same, he says. Without the powers, you're an average loser just like me. With the only difference being, Mob has the courage to navigate his world and life without them. The physical transformation that Teru undergoes as he slowly loses his mind fighting Mob is brilliant to see also, and not to mention hilarious. And perfectly,
it is
when
funny
Teru
seeing him lose
resorts
his
to
hair in
attacking
that
Mob
way.
with his bare hands, he actually makes contact and chokes him to the point where he, Mob, begins to let his consciousness slip away, and as a result, we're building to an explosion when... What a wimpy punch. But this very gesture, despite it being so weak, is the heaviest philosophical blow thrown in this battle of ideals. For despite the dire circumstances, he refuses to use his powers.
Yeah.
This is what moral conviction looks like.
Aw.
Not doing things because they are easy, but doing them because they are the right thing to do in that moment, despite being difficult. If he hadn't already, this is the moment where I believe Mob gained the respect of literally everyone else watching along at home.
使わない。僕は変わるんだ。
From this point on, we're offered glimpses into the past where he and his brother, as little kids, were ambushed by thugs. Mob blacks out, and when he awakens, their bodies are strewn across the street with blood everywhere. This is a formative time in his life, one that I'm sure impacted Mob's fear concerning his powers and their outright use in day-to-day life. But I think this most importantly demonstrates something for us to notice, something we haven't seen from Mob's prior explosions. In those moments, he may have exploded with power, always looking amazing. However, he always also seemed to be in control. But this flashback to a traumatic
Shows us
event
that he
shared
can
with
lose
his
it.
brother shows something else. An instance in time where Mob truly blacks out and someone else takes the wheel. In this scene, the tone shifts.
Oh,
From
yeah.
the shallow philosophical battle that Teru was forcing Mob to engage in to an all-out fight for survival.
All his clothes are gone,
as
and he's
Mob
just
loses
like,
all
smack.
control, and a distinctly different, almost terror-ridden atmosphere takes hold and refuses to relinquish control until everything before him is left in ruin, flinging Teru, naked, and half the school into the sky above the clouds. When he eventually returns to his senses, he realizes what he's done, cries and laments the fact that perhaps he hasn't changed since that day after all. From an animation standpoint, episode 5 is absurdly good.
It's
This is all
gorgeous.
from the mind of Kenichi Fujisawa, who storyboarded this, directed it, and was its animation director also. He's
Sick.
one of the big names in the, quote, web gen movement. This movement
Web
refers
gen.
to a young group of people who came up in the mid-2000s learning to animate on tablets
sweet.
and using software like Flash,
Right,
helping
right.
their work feel distinctly different in an industry that even to this day primarily uses pencils and paper for animation. And much like episode 3, there's a distinct focus on movement with character rigidity and model correctness thrown out the window in favor of big idiosyncratic styles, which, as it happens, is a defining cornerstone of web-gen animation. And you've seen Fujisawa's work already most likely, having made a name for himself on Naruto, animating one of the most iconic
no
parts
way.
of Kakashi
The
versus
Kakashi
Obito, having
Obito.
also
So he knows how to direct a fight that means something more than just the fight. Yeah, so he's done that before. Amazing.
taken part in other ambitious projects like Full Metal Alchemist Milos movie and Space Dandy. Looking at these two productions, he's always been drawn to
I haven't
projects
watched
that
Sacred
try
Star
to
of
do
Milos
something
in
different.
ages.
And
What's
Mob
Space
fits
Dandy? I need to get
that
back on
billing
that.
to a T. And impressively, this was his debut as far as having 100% creative control over the storyboard and animation direction. Tachikawa gave him all of the freedom, and this led to a fight that's extended in length far beyond what the manga initially offered, including hilarious new visual gags. Enjoy. And wonderfully, this demonstrates an understanding for what One said he was hoping the anime would do with his series. I'm sure when he watched this episode, he had a massive dumb smile on his face. In addition to that, the legendary Norio Matsumoto, who many will know for defining so much of battle shonen action in the late 90s and early 2000s, is here. He was a massive influence in Fujisawa's work over the years, which makes the fact that they eventually made friends and joined forces on this project an almost fairy tale-like ending for the duo. And it doesn't even stop there. This episode has so much care and thought put into its production that the quality even seeps into the sound and music design. Mob's theme, entitled Mob's Emotional Explosion, is without a doubt the centerpiece of the entire musical score for this show. So let's try to break it down for a second. Driving the piece is the only trace of percussion you will hear for a lot of the track, a kick drum hitting every single beat. This really propels the entire piece with a sense of energy, almost like a frantic heartbeat.
It kind of reminds me of like Ghost in the Shell a little bit.
You also have a piano and a synth accompanying this throughout the track, though they are mixed pretty well in favor of the star of the show. That instrument. What even is that? Is it a kazoo? What is that?
What is that?
Oh, it's this. This instrument is called a Seamoons. Sounds wrong to say. And by instrument, I guess I really mean robot abomination with artificial lungs and throat capable of making that weird kazoo-like singing we hear.
Okay, didn't know this existed.
By Meiwa Denki, who was actually the inventor of the automaton. This dude is a literal music Willy Wonka who invents nonsense instruments, as he so calls.
Absolutely
and
awesome.
So Kenji Kawai, the guy behind the OST for Mob Psycho 100, seems to have a particular interest in Seamoons in particular, as this is not even the first time he uses one in his work.
Oh.
And contracted Denki for the production of Mob Psycho 100's score. This instrument brings such an incredibly unique flavor to this piece. There really is a sense of profound power and terror that is conveyed with its musical output, which certainly makes sense given how terrifying the instrument that carves out the song looks.
Ooh, he's gonna say it.
Ritu and Mob. Having explored what it means to have powers and to use them responsibly, to improve yourself using your own abilities, we find ourselves now delving into a story that contends with the opposite side of that argument. We now know what one ought to pursue if they have powers, but what if they don't? What if their lives are comparatively perfect, but they remain fixated on what they perceive is a lacking in their life?
They do what Sasuke does and seek power elsewhere.
This is the story of Mob and his younger brother Ritsu, and their dynamic in these episodes might be the most compelling element of this entire story so far, because quite simply, they are both characters that don't find value in what makes them intrinsically special, but instead feel worthless by focusing on what they're not. With compliments from his brother Mob like, Ritsu is much more talented than I am and doesn't do anything weird, ringing like an insult in his younger brother's ears. And because of this attention to detail concerning these characters, when you plop them into this fantastical world and allow the narrative to be driven by them and the believable human choices they make, it not only makes for entertaining reading and watching, but creates a captivating story the likes of which I honestly could not look away from. Early on with Ritsu, I was convinced he was a simple and kind younger brother. However, since then, he has evolved to a comparatively far more complex, believable, jealous, and, well, resentful younger sibling that has far more in common now with his older brother than he might think. Just not in the areas he personally cares for at this moment. Detached from that for a moment, the framing of Onigawara is an interesting way for Ritsu and Shinji to express their non-conforming or authentic selves, so to speak. It's all a balance of those who framed Onigawara leveraging their power, or reputation, to harass and frame someone who comparatively has less social credit. In other words, Ritsu and Shinji in this instance are in this scene making the same mistake and metaphorically doing exactly as Teru did in the last episode, abusing their power with them leveraging their strengths to prevent him from using what he's good at.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that, like, recurring theme. Abusing what power they have to get what they want and not caring about the effects it has on everyone else. But Mob does care.
Fighting. And honestly, a lesser show would stop there and focus on their A-plot, but brilliantly, one offers Onigawara something else. He uses this as a lesson to teach the character, taking this as a signal that while yes, Onigawara himself, he was wrongfully accused and his name was destroyed by these people wrongfully, it was his lack of care to his other attributes that created the perfect set of dominoes to fall should the correct situation arise. And that's such a subtle, nuanced, and brilliant lesson for someone, a kid, potentially watching this, to take away from this whole show. However, unfortunately, Ritu, his lesson isn't so easily learned.
No.
For once his anguish over not having powers gets the better of him, he soon realizes that he may have powers when he sees for the very first time...
Dimple.
What's up, Dimple? As an interesting ruffle to this unfolding story, the surrounding gangs
I was
of this
wondering
great
what he was doing with that
territory
shot
Mob
there.
Psycho 100 is set in have bore witness to the terrifying power of Mob, without actually knowing who that in fact was, and this secures the reasonable level of uncertainty that makes the following chapters all the more interesting because, at some point, due to his abuse of power, Ritsu will gain the attention of someone he really isn't ready for.
Oh,
It's
mate.
Teru, cosplaying as Marge Simpson, I think. Pineapple. Either
Brilliant.
way, he's not ready for this cat
Stupid
either.
hair,
but what's
man.
awesome is that Teru now stands as a monument to the good that Mob can bring to people. He's completely changed his outlook, and as a reformed man, he recognizes the same sort of trouble appearing in Ritsu, following him all the way down an alleyway where he's confronted by an army of thugs ready to fight, who they think is Mob, his brother, and really, this outing here is just to show the progression and downfall of Ritsu, the evolution or progression of his powers, but the downfall of his ideals.
Yeah,
and
he's
character.
losing
The
his
destruction
humanity,
he's
like
wrought
what he
on this
was
group
all
of
about.
troubled kids is unsettling, and in the eyes of one individual, it's more unsettling than anything else.
Oh, no.
うちの弟が怪我をさせてしまってどうもごめんなさい。今後とも仲良くしてやってください。
I spoke
Bless.
earlier in this video about the two most famous characters one as an author has created in Saitama and Mob respectively, and how they differ from one another while sharing many key parts of how their stories are written in common. However, I think taking a closer look at the fundamental differences between these two now iconic characters will shine a light largely on what substance is at the core of this phenomenal scene, and why I believe Mob is, when comparing these two characters, potentially the most relatable. Mob and Saitama are most different in that they are driven by different themes around their similar situations. They are both wildly strong characters that dwarf everyone around them. Neither
Yes.
are particularly intelligent and have to of course contend with the mundanity of life despite their supernatural abilities. However, at his core, Saitama from One Punch Man is ultimately an exploration into the question, if you manage to become great or the best, then what? What
Yeah,
more
what's next?
is there? Delving into the practical and emotional consequences of achieving exactly what you set out to achieve. In other words, in the specific case of Saitama's, is being better than everyone else worth it? On the flip side, through the character of Mob, he is an exploration of what the best even means in the first place. Does being the best or strongest psychic of all time matter if you're miserable and
If you've
can't
not
make
got
friends?
everything else
and to
around
that
you,
same
yeah.
end, considering the point of view of Ritsu, does being the most academically successful or popular kid at school matter if you can't do what you want? In Ritsu's case, it's being psychic, but this question can easily be posed to anyone and highlight their weaknesses, whether they be getting good grades, doing well in sports, or what have you. The dichotomy of what people have versus what they want, with the potential results or findings of that thesis being that there isn't a best thing to be good at. Because, as Mob has gone to great lengths to explain, being special at one thing doesn't make you any better of a person than the man next to you who sucks at that. This, as I alluded to earlier, is highlighted in Mob's heart-to-heart with his brother in episode 4 and further reinforced through his battle with Teru. In other words, Mob is forced to grapple with and evolve from the cards he has been dealt in life. It just so happens that hand he's been dealt is being the absolute best psychic of all time and sucking complete ass at literally
Everything else.
else.
Yeah.
And I think it's for that
Bless.
very reason why Mob resonates with those that take the time to watch this series so easily. A sense of connection is formed to the character of Mob that I think is even stronger than that which One Punch Man establishes, simply because that theme that Mob himself as a character represents is so much more relatable. Every single one of us has something that we believe we are exceptionally good at, and we all have aspects about ourselves that we find deeply unsatisfactory. Finding our personal worth among those elements is so hard, but Mob is living proof that pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone to strive for goals that don't come easy to improve yourself are always worth it.
Yeah, sometimes you've just gotta make that decision.
And this is what I love about one's writing. On its face, it presents as a gag manga with little else to be expected from it aside from some supremely well-crafted comedy. But when you least expect it to, it can profoundly reach across the screen and give you a wonderfully emotional and enriching experience, the likes of which are seldom seen in this genre.
Mate. There are so many emotional moments in Mob Psycho, man. You would not think, like, when you just look at it, you would not think this is going to tug at my heartstrings every now and then, but it does.
This fight for the fate of Ritsu is utterly and dumbfoundingly gorgeous. The movement, the framing, the dramatic camera work, the awesomeness that Mob is emanating with the greatest of ease is spectacular, and interestingly, this scene brought to my attention something I honestly should have noticed sooner. Mechanically, Mob's action scenes are fun for the same reasons Gohan's action scenes are in early Dragon Ball Z. They are both innocent and unassuming characters that want nothing more than a peaceful resolution driven to a breaking point they didn't want to reach before finally erupting in an incredible show of force.
Yeah, that is
Even
what
some of the
was
framing
awesome
of Mob
about
in
that.
this scene feels reminiscent of Dragon Ball Z at times to me.
Yeah, like the way the hair and everything, boom. But yeah, it is. It's like you feel awkward because you know he doesn't really want to do it, but it's the right thing to do.
Which is more than okay. However, for the first time in this series, Mob has a lot more on his table here than might meet the eye, and due to that, we're shown a sign of him that we've only seen once before. A terrifying set of powers that engulf the thoughtful and kind personality of the young Mob,
Just
and
look
in a
at it.
devastating
So
series of
gorgeous.
attacks. Heavy and precise ones that border on difficult to look at times, Mob is eventually outsmarted, leaving his unconscious body still animating itself in a further unsettling fashion, struggling for consciousness. Of these 3 episodes that make up this section, there's really only one that possesses animation and direction I felt I needed to touch on, and it's episode 8. It might be my favorite episode, I don't know. And you know what? I'm leaning into the
Which
meme.
episode was this?
This might be the best episode I've watched in the series so far.
Oh.
After 2 smaller episodes, Mob's insane production value returns in full force, and the show's character designer, Yoshimichi Kameda, takes the reins once again as animation director, with a storyboard that features heavy contributions from the series director, Tachikawa. You can feel Kameda's expert and confident touches all over this episode. From the sketchy line work to the awesome poses, it's unmistakably Kameda. Furthermore, this episode is packed to bursting with an enormous number of insanely talented animators, the extent to which could very well
colours.
be its own standalone video. But perhaps the most important inclusion here is Bones' superstar, one of the most influential animators to ever exist, with hundreds of people now animating his distinct impact
Oh, the
frames and cubic
blocks.
debris. It is, of course, Yutaka Nakamura.
Yeah.
It cannot be overstated just how iconic, influential, and immensely talented this man is. Whether you know him by name or not, you've no doubt seen him in shows like My Hero Academia and One Punch Man, and go further back and you'll see him in Cowboy Bebop. Heck, you might even have seen scenes that you
Brotherhood.
thought were him,
Whoa.
but were in fact just inspired by his legendary work. Nakamura's scene in this episode is absurd. Not only is he drawing insane character motion, but the guy's also animating building exteriors and
Yes,
interiors. There's
so
such a wonderful
sick.
sense of momentum
That-
and weight to his
that
movements that
moment
elevates
there.
this scene to heights they otherwise wouldn't reach without him. He's a master of his craft in full force in this episode, which, after Mob, Dimple, and Terra ready themselves to retrieve Ritsu from the clutches of this evil organization of proficient psychics, sets up nicely for the final but incredible arc of this season.
Oh my god, this is so sick.
Claw. Let me tell you, while I absolutely loved every single episode in this season, nothing could have prepared me for how remarkable this last stretch of episodes was. With the introduction of the Claw 7th Division, the stakes are immediately raised.
Oh,
We've spent
yes.
the entire show so far feeling safe because we know that Mob is there and stronger than anyone
But there's
else.
an organization
The
of
situation we
psychics
find
out there
ourselves
that
in
are
now
really
is unlike
powerful. Oh my
anything
god.
we've come across before. This group of powerful, evil adult psychics has kidnapped Ritsu as well as all of the Awakening Lab kids, and Mob is not there to squash the baddies before any harm can come to them. Of course, it doesn't take long before Mob and Tero come face to face with one of Claw's bosses, and 12 seconds of child-sanctioned waterboarding later, they have all they need to head to Claw HQ, except they don't seem to believe any of the info that Claw boss has given up, and watching this guy dangle upside down, completely failing to explain that he has told him effectively everything already, is so damn funny and really highlights another one of the strong suits of this show. the sound design.
Okay.
All of the sound design around every punch, kick, and use of psychic ability works to deliver the adaptation in a convincing and gripping manner. But I think one aspect that really shines above the rest here is the use of a sound effect to elevate a certain element of the show. The cowbell that strikes as we are shown updates on mob's percentage is a recurring example, but the way that they are used to highlight the comedy really cannot be understated either. The hard cut to the perplexed claw boss with the bell sound effect ringing out has got to be one of the hardest laughs I have got from the entire show. Little touches like that are throughout the sound work in the anime, and I think it's a worse show without them. While various mob and Teru hijinks are going on, we are treated to Ritu and Ko being locked up by easily the scariest claw member of the bunch. I mean, seriously, Jesus. This guy's face and voice are something I wish
so
I could
weird.
go back and unsee and unhear. The entire sequence is honestly so very chilling to watch, and it's actually the first
Right.
time we've seen any harm actually come to the humans in this show, much less a kid. And with it, we see the return of our beloved paint-on-glass
Paint on
animator,
glass. You see, I never
Sato,
knew that
to
was a-
really drive home
I've
the
learned a
chilling
lot in this
nature of it
video.
all. But from this, we get what I think is probably the best Ritu moment of the entire season. Once Daichi, the other circle-headed twin, lets everyone know that his brother's death was actually just a psychic illusion, Ritu takes to concocting an actual escape plan. And this escape really highlights so many of my favorite elements of these final episodes, because it's not Ritsu's new psychic powers, the ones that he's been painfully longing for his entire life, that saves the day here. Well, not completely at least. It's his natural talents, his cunning intelligence and social skills that allows him to utilize every single kid there and execute a flawless escape plan. It didn't matter how strong he'd become, what saved the day in the end was what made him unique from the get-go. And that's really the theme that stays with us for the rest of this season. Once Mob, Teru, and Dimple, who is now possessing some poor Claw crony, make their way inside Claw HQ, they are quickly met by Koyama, aka the lip ring guy that fought Mob and kidnapped Ritsu in the first place. And let me just say, as soon as I saw this rematch lined up, man, I was prepared. I was ready for another epic Mob throwdown. Except,
It just doesn't mess about at all. Let's keep going.
Yikes. None of them are messing around. In fact,
Nope.
the entire episode revolves around Mob and crew splitting up in search of Ritsu, and man, is that episode fun. This entire mini-arc has so much more of an ensemble cast feel to it than anything we've seen so far, and it's just a blast to watch as we bounce back and forth between Dimple and his stolen body shenanigans, Teru competently dealing with the terrifying espers sent his way, and Mob, well, we actually don't get to see much of Mob fighting, in fact. These poor claw bosses are up against Mob with no concern for holding back, so most of them don't even last long enough to warrant being defeated on screen, apparently. And honestly, seeing Mob completely and utterly decimate everyone in front of him isn't
Yeah.
even really scary at this point. It's
We
almost
just
euphoric.
expect
a
it,
major
yeah.
drive of this
It's like,
entire
go on,
story
lad.
thus far has been the slow build-up of Mob's emotions and power over time. The small bits of release as he explodes. But now we are getting to see him cut loose. And damn if there isn't something satisfying about just one-shotting every single scar he comes up against.
It's
Playing
so
even
cool.
more into that ensemble cast element, both Dimple and Teru end up running into their own scars to deal with. Teru runs up against Miyagawa, a full-blown pyrotechnic who actually manages to put Teru against the ropes by engulfing him in flames. Hironori Tanaka, who many people might know from Chainsaw Man's crazy third
Oh.
episode, tackles the brunt of this action sequence, and
Cool.
man, is it an absolute treat. You'd almost sweat
So
just
many
looking
talented
at it.
people worked on
Dimple
this.
similarly runs into Matsuo, another scar who keeps powerful pet spirits to eviscerate his foes. And all of this bouncing back and forth between fights creates within these episodes an almost monster of the week type vibe, with the wide variety of enemies offered up to us all at once. There is, however, definitely a bit of an uneasy feeling in these fights, as just the same way Ritsu and Co are in the enemy territory absent of Mob's protection, so too now are Dimple and Teru. And while we do have decent confidence in their strengths and abilities, there is still this creeping feeling of danger as they face increasingly stronger foes alone.
Yeah, it's like as they're going, it's like, when is it going to happen that these two need Mob? Because it has to happen. Like, Mob has to be the one that fights the end boss baddie, and these two are doing all right, but it's like, are they? They're not. You know, they're not the main character.
Because, as we've been reminded time and again throughout this series, the full weight of this mission's success rests on whether or not Mob can win the day. The rest of them, in our eyes, can help, but they also just need to survive. Dimple's fight with Matsuo is definitely the first and most prominent example of this, as he is largely outgunned and outmatched against these full-power spirits he's up against. Dimple is such an incredibly enjoyable character to watch, so seeing him manage to outwit his enemies by possessing, unpossessing, and then repossessing his borrowed body to get the enemy away from him is a whole lot of fun, but expertly plays into this character.
He is
At
a
least
clever
until
guy.
we
He's
learn
very,
that Matsuo
very
has
schemy.
more pets still and seals Dimple away in a jar crammed full of the hungry bunch. And with that momentum shift, so too is Taro also taken out by a tag team of claws that catch him off guard. It's at this point the stress noticeably starts to build in the story, and so as not only Dimple and Taro are both captured, but Ritu and company also run into and are swiftly taken out by Sho, a powerful young psychic who apparently isn't even a member of Claw's 7th Division, but a visiting intern? What's this kid's deal anyway?
Oh, it was his
I'm sure it
dad.
won't matter
Or was
later
that
on.
in...
As the
yeah.
episode heads towards a close and Mob dispatches yet another few scars both on and off screen, he also discovers and knocked out Ritsu on the ground following his fight with Sho. At this point, the light-hearted bad guy swatting vibe of the mini-arc comes to an end, and in its place is a very real, palpable sense of terror. Already grappling with a crippling sense of grief and depression, Mob is ambushed by the same Claw member that showed the Awakening Lab crew visions of their member's death. And in that very same way, he shows Mob visions of Ritsu's terrifying, graphic, bloody demise. Mob has dealt with a lot of stress in this season so far.
Oh, yes, he
Much
has.
of it has been too much for him to take, and has resulted in the incredible yet terrifying explosions we are now accustomed to seeing. But this one is different. As the percentiles struggle to avoid reaching 100%, the climax is not one of rage or even furious violence. It is something entirely different as we see flashed on screen rejection. Mob, perhaps out of pure subconscious defense, completely rejects what he is seeing and reflects all of his fear, remorse, stress, and power back onto Muto, leaving both
Take
him
that.
and Mob completely unconscious and injured. The scream that Mob lets out here is without a doubt my favorite bit of acting in the entire season. His scream and the way it is mixed and layered is so raw and chilling. It blows me away every single time I take a look at it. And with that, the stage is set. The Awakening Lab kids, Dimple, every single one of our protagonists are defeated or unconscious. Locked away in a room that inhibits all psychic powers, there is no one left, and certainly no one strong enough to take down Claw. They've lost.
Reagan! Let's go!
Reagan? Oh yeah, Reagan's here!
Yeah!
Say the line!
Mark.
This episode is the best Mob episode I've ever seen.
Yep.
It fires on all
So
cylinders,
good.
delivering every single element of the series flawlessly. And it's all because of one man, Reagan Arataka, the greatest psychic to ever live. I
Wow.
mentioned this before, but Reagan is unlike any character I've ever seen in anime. Sure, there are other characters that have a similar vibe of fake it till you make it. I mean, Mr. Satan, hell, even King from One's own One Punch Man is, but Reagan is different because, as this episode makes abundantly clear, to the surprise of every single viewer, Reagan is the real deal. Not in that he was harboring supreme powers of any description, no. It's actually something we've seen from the start, that Reagan is really, really good at talking.
Oh, yeah.
Reagan is as good at talking, arguing, and convincing people as Mob is at being a psychic. And in truth, even though this is the second to last episode of the season, this episode is, in
It's
fact,
so
the climax
good.
of the story. And in this grand finale that is later packed with tension, action, and emotional climaxes, the first half of the episode is composed almost exclusively of Reagan making me laugh out loud. I'm a grown man sitting in my living room, laughing at my TV for like 15 minutes straight at an anime character inadvertently convincing an entire evil organization he is their leader by accident. This show, man, this show is perfect.
It's amazing.
Yo, Mobu!
With everyone defeated and locked away, Reagan arrives on the scene by following Mob's phone GPS coordinates because, of course he is.
Of course he
And
is.
as he waltzes up to the brigade of Claw cronies at the door, it doesn't take long before his confidence and blunt nature has managed to convince the entire group that he is, in fact, the leader of Claw. And as he's escorted in, he then stops the Claw grunts from attacking the discovered Awakening kids by letting them know that kidnapping kids and
Is
being
bad.
violent is wrong. And again, the level of catharsis I felt watching Reagan just completely own this entire organization with his words and confidence alone rivals the feeling of watching Mob one-shot someone. And once Reagan reaches where Mob is being held, he quickly dismisses all the grunts by explaining to them that what they are doing is actually a crime. And they're off
You're
on their merry
breaking the
way.
law.
What's that you say? I've only been talking about Reagan for the last 3 minutes?
Hell yeah.
Correct. What's your point? In seriousness though, the back half of this episode is somehow even more remarkable than the first.
Reagan is absolutely phenomenal. Like, he's just consistently awesome, man. Season 3 is just like, but yeah, again, not going to say until we get to that review.
As Reagan and Mob finally run into the remaining Claw Scars, Spirit Pokemon Trainer, Nappa,
遅いぞナッパ
Samurai Businessman, and Tiny Gas Mask Girl, who is the leader of Claw's 7th Division somehow. And so begins the true central conflict of the rest of the season. In a show so jam-packed with action, comedy, wonderful bits of animation, every single element that can be going for a show like this, the true conflict of this final mini-arc isn't a big cinematic fight. It isn't Mob hitting 100% and destroying everything in his path. Rather, it is Reagan wanting to make sure that Mob knows using powers against others is wrong.
It's wrong, yeah.
With 4 separate scars directly threatening the lives of his mentor, family, and friends, Mob is so desperately backed into the corner of being an anime protagonist and fighting back. But despite all of that, Reagan continues to insist that Mob shouldn't. I find this core emotional conflict so enthralling, and not at all what I expected going into this show. We all know that Mob could wipe all 4 of these people off the face of the earth without so much as a second thought, but should he? He's just a kid, a literal middle
a
schooler
lot to
who
put on
hasn't
yourself
even
at such a
figured
young
out how to get
age.
his crush to notice him. So often when we sit and watch shows like this, I think we tend to discount the reality of the situation, rationalizing it away as being necessary or what other choice do they have? But Reagan rejects that entirely. He walks into this arc uninvited, looks us straight in the face and says, "Are you crazy? These are kids." And the hardest part is, it's difficult to say what is right at this point. Because yes, Mob is just a kid, but he's a kid who is about to be brutally murdered along with everyone he knows if he doesn't fight back. Does not hurting others with your powers really warrant letting that happen? It's all happening so fast. How is Mob supposed to figure this out? Well, Reagan doesn't really give him a chance to figure it out. While everyone is distracted trying to take Mob out, Reagan whips out another one of his special techniques, this time in the form of a simple drop kick to the leader Ishiguro and punching Muraki in the
So
face.
sick.
Which actually works surprisingly well, at least for long enough to let him talk some more. But unfortunately, Reagan miscalculated here. His plan to knock some sense into these adults and take them out of murdering actual children means nothing when he's up against these people. They aren't really adults. They're practically grown children, stuck in arrested development, still fighting their battles and aiming for their goals with fists and blades. So, with all of them completely ignoring Reagan's words, the big battle of the season commences. And wow, what a battle this is. This entire show is incredibly animated, but perhaps nowhere is that as apparent as these final fights. In fact, by the time this episode was airing, the entire anime had wrapped up its production and completed. Now, that might not sound like all that much of a feat since there's only 1 episode left, but unfortunately, almost all anime are run on a painfully tight schedule. So the fact that this anime managed to wrap up production entirely before its penultimate episode even airs is remarkable to me. This episode also marks the entrance of one of Mob Psycho 100's most prolific names in its production, Hakuyu Go. Tackling multiple long
Who
plots
is
in both
this?
of the major fights here, he was 24 years of age when this was made, and had only just joined the
Wow,
industry 2
very young.
years prior.
Oh, me,
how
me,
can
me.
you even
Wow.
begin to talk about something like that? The background animation, the effects work, and the Nakamura-esque inspired, full-drawn
Whoa.
environments. I mean, it's just absurd. 24 years old, let me remind you.
That's
And while
incredible.
I haven't watched it yet, it is my understanding that he is here to stay going forward with Mob Psycho as an absolute powerhouse of a contributor to this production. As the fights continue to progress, Teru, Ritsu, and Reagan continue to lose ground and become more in danger, as Teru continues to call out Mob, begging him to fight back for real to save them all. Insurmountable pressure then starts to build. With each blow traded in the background, Mob's stress and conviction grows further. If he doesn't do something, they're all going to die. Reagan desperately pleads to Mob to not fight back. But they can't run. They're all fending off deadly attacks from powerful psychics. Reagan pleads one last time, don't fight against someone with murderous intent. From all of this, with nowhere else to turn, no choices left to make, Mob is backed into a corner, and as Miyosato's absolutely remarkable painting glass animation returns once again, Mob makes his choice.
やめとけモブお前が苦しくなるだけだ
Yeah.
嫌な時はな逃げたっていいんだよ
This moment is genuinely, for me, the climax of the entire season.
So
The
nice.
hard cut from the build-up of the music and visuals
To
surrounding
just-
Mob's rage and acceptance of murderous intent to Reagan smacking him in the face and setting him straight is absolutely flawless. Every single element presented to us indicates that we were about to see Mob completely cut
Yeah.
loose and showcase all of his powers to us in a fantastic demonstration of raw power and rage. I mean, it's nearing the climax of the anime. Of course it will. And there's plenty of precedent set for this to create our anticipation. But with one slap from Reagan, every single element of this anticipation is hard cut away from in a single frame. Reagan has managed to cut through all of this and get it through to Mob and us as an audience, and later the rest of the people in the room, that this is all meaningless violence and not how children should act.
No.
The entire scene is so incredibly subversive of what you would expect from an anime, and the audio and visuals execute on that completely flawlessly. What a show! It is such a shocking, beautiful piece of television, and it couldn't have concluded any other way, really. Every single action in this entire season, every character conflict surrounding Mob, every piece of Reagan wackiness, it all comes collapsing in on a singular moment and the flashback that follows. We see the very first time that Mob meets Reagan, and Reagan plainly lays out the central thesis of this entire season. Just because you have psychic powers doesn't make you any less human. The same goes for people who can run fast, or are smart, or even who stink. We all have characteristics that define us, and in the end, they are not what define us. What matters is embracing who you are, being kind to others, and becoming a good person. What a powerful theme. What an
Yeah.
incredible message. Not just for the child in distress here, but for all of us.
師匠
Much to my surprise, the beginning of the final episode doesn't begin with a giant mob explosion, but rather a quiet realization that Mob doesn't have to fight, that running is also an option. At which point, Reagan leaps up from the ground, scolding the swordsman for trying to hurt him with a toy sword. What?
Yeah, this
as
is
we
so
quickly begin to realize,
sick.
it would appear in the stress and emotional release of the moment prior, Mob inadvertently projected his 100% or
Onto
should I say
Reagan.
1000% power into Reagan in sort
And
of a
this
fight or
moment's so
flight response.
freaking
And
cool.
boy, oh boy, does Reagan put it to good use. What follows is a highly entertaining sequence of Reagan shenanigans, completely
Mate.
dismantling the psyches and beliefs of these scars.
Just
This
slaps
power
it
trip
away.
is so fun to watch.
Oh.
And at this point, Reagan might as well be the main character. And once again, he manages to utterly blindside me by putting into perspective what is actually happening here. These people that think that they're special, capable of ruling the world with their strength, but they're not. Everyone is good at something. Being a strong psychic isn't going to make them popular. Hurting others isn't going to fix Sakurai the swordsman's traumatic childhood of dead parents and foster home abuse. In fact, as Reagan describes, he too had a tragic childhood.
こいつ俺と同じ
One time, he was young. He forgot to tell his parents that it was sports day at school, so he didn't have
No.
anything to eat for lunch that particular day.
それはお前が悪いというか
Despite the insanity of all of this, Reagan seems to manage to convince all of the claws. Though it was Mob's power that facilitated his actions, it was actually his approach and charisma that made the difference. All but their leader Ishiguro, who, as it turns out, is, oh dear God, he's a wrinkly old man. Make it go away. With Reagan's
Hey.
powers run out and Mob exhausted, Ishiguro's final tantrum would surely spell doom for them all, if it wasn't for the fact that the climax happened last episode, that is. So, as it happens, Sho, that intern kid from a few episodes back, is actually the Claw's leader's kid and was checking up on the 7th Division the entire time, promptly putting an end to Ishiguro and caps off the combat. Disappointed, however, in Mob's decision to run. The rest of this episode is a sequence of really cozy tie-ups and check-ins on all of our characters. Mob is glad to be back at school with his crush, the gym bros continue to be sick
The
as
gym
all hell, and
bros.
Taro is ready to lead the Awakening Lab kids onto higher highs. Reagan, able to see Dimple now, is happy to have another helper at his side, and looming over the distance, Claw's leader seems to approach. If it isn't clear already, I think this resolution, this arc, and well, really this whole season are utterly brilliant.
It's amazing.
Those of you who watch
So
my channel
freaking good.
often enough know that I'm not always this positive about the works that I watch or read, but there is a reason I am now. This show delivers on every possible front. The story, animation, music, sound design, compositing, editing, storyboarding, everything is
Everything.
working in tandem to bring you this wonderful story and characters in the best way it possibly can. And the story that we do get, in the end, is 100% worth that Herculean effort. I have watched a lot of anime and read a lot of manga for this channel, as well as in my personal time across my whole life. Some I've liked, some not so much, but it has been quite some time since I so deeply enjoyed watching an anime like this. The characters and themes it delivers are remarkably genuine, thoughtful, and enthralling, and I can't wait for what Season 2 has in store for me.
Mate.
In the end, the core motivation behind my
Just
wanting to explore
consistently
this series in greater detail was that I wanted to try to make sense of why or how someone like One became successful as a mangaka. Over the years in reviewing these stories from the East, my aim has been to uncover the footprints or fingerprints each and every artist invariably leaves on their work as I read them. Whether it be the rebellious nature of Araki in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, the pain and anguish left behind by Togashi in Hunter x Hunter, or even the initially sad but inspirational journey of
I have that
Kishimoto
as a
through the
poster
likes
up
of his
there.
Naruto series. Normally, people tend to have a superficial reaction to one's work because of how it looks on the surface. More so than any other successful mangaka out there, one's work tends to be initially dismissed, with those that are not open to understanding how it reads or how his work works, making up a common part of one's experience trying to make it as an artist in this industry. However, true to the lessons he's learned and almost exactly like the stories he's written, the crude-looking mangas and the silly stories he presents often have far more going on right beneath the surface than one might expect. But once you do notice it, that's the moment that one not only wins you over as a fan, but potentially, if you're lucky, changes your outlook and approach to life for the better. And so, before I finish this episode, I'd like to share a quote with you. Nearing the end of a particular conversation, an interviewer says what he takes away from Mob Psycho 100 is that you can't truly grow up without interacting with other people, further adding that he doesn't recall any other manga that puts so much care into depicting one's own personal growth. In response to these observations, One explains his approach towards Mob Psycho 100.
Okay.
What I have in mind is to tell a big story of one little step. I don't believe our lives change completely for the better at a short notice. It's all the small progress we make that's important. That's what I think while drawing this manga.
Well, I can't wait to see his Season 2 review and the Season 3 review. That was boss. That was really good. Very good. Very entertaining. Very educational as well. I like that he goes into all the people that have worked on it and what they've worked on and the animation styles and stuff. That stuff on the music as well. And that, what was it? The Sea Moon? Yeah, the Sea Moon instrument. Wow. Yeah, absolutely class. Cool. I'll definitely check out the next one. And until then, thank you to my patrons. If you want to have your name at the end of every video I upload, links in the description to the Patreon page. $1 a month is all I ask to support the channel. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you guys very much for that. And thank you all for watching. What do you guys think of that? What do you guys think of this? Click like, subscribe, everything. Leave comments down below. Let me know what I should watch and discuss in future videos. I'll see you guys, all you guys, next time.